When I was 9, my parents told me, "You're lucky we let you stay. You're not like your perfect brother." I was sent to school in torn clothes. 17 years later, I was the keynote speaker at a tech summit. My dad laughed loudly. "You? A speaker?" I simply replied, "The topic's on resilience. Want a front row seat?" What I said next made him go pale. When I walked past my dad toward the podium, he leaned back in his chair, let out this loud, snorting laugh, and said, half to my mom and half to the whole auditorium, "You? A speaker?" I didn't even break stride. I just smiled a little and said over my shoulder, "The topic's resilience. Want a front row seat?" He looked like he didn't know whether to keep laughing or just sink into the floor. My mom pretended to check something in her purse. My brother, Liam, scrolled on his phone like he couldn't care less. Standing at that podium, looking at them sitting there, was like living inside someone else's dream. The last time they'd paid this much attention to me, I was 9 years old, standing in the kitchen of our falling-apart house, clutching a crumpled lunch bag while my mom told me I was lucky they let me stay at all. Growing up in Flint, Michigan wasn't glamorous. Our house sat at the end of a cracked, weedy street where the streetlights barely worked and every third house was boarded up. It wasn't the worst neighborhood, but it was the kind where people minded their own business, mostly because it hurt less that way. Inside our house, the rules were clear. Liam was the golden child. I was the afterthought. It wasn't subtle. Liam got everything. Brand new clothes. The latest Game Boys and PlayStations when they came out. Birthday parties at bowling alleys and pizza places. I got second-hand dresses 2 sizes too big and birthday cakes from the discount bakery, if I got anything at all. I don't think it would have hurt so much if they hadn't rubbed it in my face constantly. When I asked why Liam got new sneakers and I didn't, my mom just shrugged and said, "He deserves it." When I brought home a math test with a 97%, my dad flipped it over without reading it and asked if Liam needed anything for his soccer game. The day I really stopped trying to win their approval was a random Thursday afternoon. I had been sent home from school because my jeans were torn so badly at the knees that a teacher thought they were a distraction. I came home holding a slip of paper and tried to explain what happened. My mom barely looked up from her soap opera, just muttered, "Well, maybe if you took care of your things like Liam does, you wouldn't have this problem." I was 9. That night, at dinner, my dad casually said, "You're lucky we even let you stay here. You're not like your perfect brother." It wasn't even said with anger. It was said like it was just a fact. Like talking about the weather. I went upstairs without finishing my plate. I pulled the covers over my head even though it was still light out. And I made myself a promise. If they didn't want me, fine. But someday, they'd have no choice but to see me. High school was just survival. I stopped trying to impress them. I got a job bagging groceries after school so I could buy my own clothes. I learned to sew up my shirts and patch my jeans when they ripped. I kept my head down, studied like hell, and spent every free minute at the public library, hiding in a dusty corner with a cheap laptop I bought off Craigslist for $50. That was where I discovered coding. It was like a secret language. I was awful at it at first. I broke more websites than I built. But nobody yelled at me. Nobody laughed. I could mess up quietly, fix it quietly, and learn quietly. By senior year, I had already built simple websites for 2 local businesses. I made barely any money, but it didn't matter. It was mine. I applied to colleges completely behind my parents' backs. I used fee waivers so I wouldn't need to ask for money. I had no idea what would happen, but one afternoon, a thick envelope arrived from the University of Michigan. Full ride. Tuition, books, housing, everything. When I showed them the letter, my dad smirked like I told him I won a contest for eating the most hot dogs in 5 minutes. "University of Michigan," he said. "Don't get your hopes up. You'll probably flunk out and come running home." My mom just folded laundry in the background, didn't even look up. "And Liam?" He laughed and said, "Good luck, nerd." They didn't offer to help me pack. They didn't drive me to the bus station. I remember dragging my 2 duffel bags down 3 cracked blocks to catch the Greyhound. My sneakers had holes in the soles. When the bus pulled away, I didn't look back. College was cruel. I worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night and tutoring computer science students during the day. I ate instant noodles 5 nights a week. I sometimes studied until my fingers cramped. But every hard thing, every awful moment, it was like fuel. I wasn't just fighting for a diploma. I was fighting to prove that I existed. That I mattered. By the time I graduated, I had enough freelance work to pay for a tiny studio apartment in Chicago. I started a company with 2 classmates, Iris and Javier. We built small software tools for small businesses. Nothing sexy. Nothing glamorous. But it paid rent. 3 years later, one of our apps, a simple scheduling tool for dog walking companies, exploded in popularity. A few big businesses adopted it. Investors started calling. At 26, I was speaking on small tech panels, giving workshops, building something real. And then came the email, Midwest Tech Innovators Summit. Keynote speaker. Topic? Resilience. I stared at the email for a long time. Detroit. Just an hour from Flint. I thought about deleting it. But then I thought about something else, a 9-year-old me, in torn jeans, standing in the kitchen with a bologna sandwich. And I hit accept. The week before the summit, I debated whether to tell them I'd be speaking. Part of me said, don't bother. Let them rot in their ignorance. But another part, the stubborn kid who used to dream they'd clap for her someday, said, tell them. Let them see. So, on a Tuesday evening, sitting at my kitchen table with a mug of cold tea beside me, I dialed their number. The same landline. Same faded memories. After 3 rings, my mom answered. Hello? Her voice was flat. No recognition. No warmth. I cleared my throat. Hi, Mom. It's Audrey. Silence stretched. I imagined her glancing at the caller ID, debating whether to hang up. Oh, she said finally. Well. What do you want? Straight to the point. I swallowed the lump in my throat and kept my voice steady. I'm speaking at a tech event in Detroit next Saturday. It's open to the public. Thought you might want to come. Another long pause. I pictured her in the cluttered living room, TV blaring in the background, maybe Liam lounging nearby. I'll tell your father, she said. And hung up. No goodbye. No, we'll try to be there. Just cold air buzzing in my ear. I stared at my phone for a long time after that. Wondering, not for the first time, why I ever expected anything different. The morning of the summit, I woke up before dawn. I didn't have a fancy routine. No green smoothies, no meditation. Just me, standing in my tiny bathroom, smoothing down the navy suit jacket I'd bought second-hand but tailored to fit like armor. In the mirror, I looked older than I felt. Tired, but proud. The drive to Detroit was quiet. I played no music. Just the hum of the tires and the rising sun bleeding gold over the horizon. The venue was bigger than I expected, a gleaming glass convention center overlooking the river. Rows of polished chairs, huge banners with logos and sponsors. A stage with spotlights that made everything look a little too real. I checked in, clipped on my speaker badge, and sat backstage while the early panels went on. My hand shook a little. Not because of the crowd. Because I didn't know if they were here. 5 minutes before my slot, I dared to peek out through the curtain. I almost missed them at first. Back row. Like they were hoping to go unnoticed. My dad, slouched in his chair, arms crossed. My mom, picking at a hangnail. Liam, of course, scrolling endlessly on his phone. I don't know what I expected. Flowers? Proud smiles? They didn't even look like they wanted to be there. And yet, somehow, that made it easier. When the host announced my name, the room filled with polite applause. As I stepped out under the lights, I heard it. That laugh. Loud, sharp, unmistakably Carl. You? A speaker? He said it like a joke. Like something so absurd he couldn't help but share it with everyone around him. I didn't even look at him directly. Just turned slightly and said, light and easy, the topic's resilience. Want a front row seat? A ripple of soft laughter went through the audience. Not cruel laughter. The kind that said, we're with you. I stepped up to the podium, took a breath that felt like breathing underwater, and began. I didn't use the speech I had written. The polished, safe one with statistics and buzzwords and motivational quotes. Instead, I told a story. My story. I talked about growing up in Flint. About second-hand clothes that didn't fit and school lunches I was too embarrassed to eat. About teachers who pulled me aside to give me supplies quietly, so I wouldn't be humiliated. I told them about teaching myself coding in the back of a library because I didn't have internet at home. I talked about what it felt like to realize, at 9 years old, that the people who were supposed to love you the most saw you as a burden. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. I told them about leaving home at 18 with nothing but 2 duffel bags and a chipped dream. About building something from scratch, messing up, trying again, messing up worse, and trying again anyway. And then, looking out into that sea of strangers, and past them, to the 3 faces I knew better than my own, I said, resilience isn't about who claps for you. It's about clapping for yourself when no one else will. For a second, the room was so quiet I could hear the whir of the projector fan. Then someone in the front row stood up and started clapping. Then another. And another. A standing ovation. I stood there, blinking, smiling, overwhelmed. And in the very back, I saw my father's face. Not angry. Not mocking. Just pale. Small. Like he had finally realized he was no longer the biggest thing in my world. After the speech, I stood awkwardly near the side of the stage, shaking hands with a few organizers and attendees who came up to thank me. Everyone was kind, smiling, and full of encouragement. Some asked for business cards. Others shared quick, heartfelt stories about their own struggles. It should have been one of the best moments of my life. And maybe it was. But the whole time, I could feel their eyes, my family's, burning a hole in the back of my head. When most of the crowd had started filtering toward the refreshment tables, I finally spotted them standing near the exit doors. They hadn't clapped. They hadn't even pretended to. They just waited. Almost like they didn't know what to do next. For a brief, insane second, I wondered if they were proud. If maybe, somehow, hearing all of that had cracked something open in them. But then my dad shoved his hands deep into his jacket pockets, rocking back on his heels, his mouth twisted in the familiar smirk he always wore when he thought he was smarter than everyone else. I knew that look. It was the same look he wore the night he told me I was lucky to still be living under their roof. I turned back to the group of young women surrounding me, some students, some junior developers, and kept talking. If they wanted to speak to me, they could wait. For once, they weren't the center of my world. Eventually, the flow of people around me slowed. Some of the crowd filtered out, laughing and chattering about the next panel. The organizers thanked me again and handed me a little gift bag, mostly filled with sponsored trinkets and a handwritten thank you card. I stood there a moment, holding the bag, pretending to fiddle with my phone, buying myself a few more minutes. I knew I couldn't avoid them forever. Finally, I slipped the phone into my purse, squared my shoulders, and walked toward them. They stayed frozen in place like a little tableau, Dad still leaning back on his heels, Mom clutching her purse strap so tightly her knuckles went white, Liam half smirking but not looking up from his screen. Up close, they looked different. Smaller somehow. Older. The years hadn't been kind to them. For a moment, I wondered if they even recognized me, not just my face, but the person I had become. I stopped a few feet away. No one said anything. The silence between us buzzed louder than the conference chatter in the background. Finally, my dad spoke first, his voice gruff and a little too loud. "Well, you always did have a big mouth." It wasn't a compliment. I looked him straight in the eye and smiled, not a sarcastic smile, not an angry one. Just a calm, level smile. "Good to see you too, Dad." My mom shifted her weight from one foot to the other like she wanted to say something but couldn't figure out what. Liam gave a soft snort of laughter without looking up from his phone. It was almost laughable. After everything, after all these years, this was it? This was what they had to offer. A snide comment, a little uncomfortable silence, and not even a shred of acknowledgement? The sadness I thought I'd feel wasn't there. Only a kind of quiet finality. Like closing a door that had been swinging half open for far too long. I asked polite questions first. "How have you guys been?" Mom muttered something about work being slow. Dad said something about the city getting worse every year. Liam finally pocketed his phone and shrugged, saying he was thinking about moving out west, where stuff actually happens. They didn't ask about me. Not about my work, not about Chicago, not about the business I'd built from scratch. Nothing. It wasn't surprising. It was just sad. At one point, my mom gestured awkwardly at the stage. "That was a lot. What you said." I tilted my head slightly. Was it wrong? The question hung in the air between us. Dad huffed a humorless laugh and muttered, "Don't flatter yourself." And that was it. No congratulations. No apology. No understanding. Nothing. The same old script, the same tired bitterness, even now. Someone from the event staff waved at me from across the room, signaling that they needed help setting up a panel discussion. A lifeline. I nodded at them, then turned back to my family. "I have to get going," I said, voice even. For a second, none of them moved. Then, awkwardly, Mom reached out and patted my shoulder once, quick, like touching something hot. "Good seeing you, Audrey," she said stiffly. Dad grunted something non-committal. Liam gave me a two-fingered salute without making eye contact. I smiled again, a real smile this time, and walked away without looking back. This time, there was no need. I spent the rest of the afternoon half-drifting through the summit, moving from panel to panel, shaking hands, answering polite questions, smiling for photos when asked. On the surface, I probably looked like I had it all together, like one of those polished, put-together women you see in magazines. Inside, I was somewhere else entirely. Every few minutes, my mind would flick back to that awkward standoff with my parents. Their stiff postures. The way my dad's mouth curled when he spoke. My mother's hollow pat on the shoulder. Liam's complete disinterest. After all these years, after everything I had built, the only thing they saw when they looked at me was still nothing. It should have hurt more. Honestly, a few years ago, it would have crushed me. But as I sat in the back row of the final panel of the day, half listening to a talk about venture capital trends, it hit me in a slow, steady wave. I wasn't trying to make them proud anymore. I wasn't even trying to make them notice. Somewhere along the way, between the late nights coding in the library, the lonely bus rides, the endless ramen dinners, the tiny wins stacking up one by one, I had stopped building my life around what they thought of me. And maybe that was the real victory. Not the speech. Not the applause. Not even the title on my badge. Just this. Sitting here. Breathing free. When the summit officially ended, the crowd spilled out into the street, milling around in loose groups, trading numbers, planning dinners, arranging Ubers. I lingered a little, letting the chaos swirl around me without getting pulled into it. Eventually, my feet started moving on their own. I wandered toward the riverfront, the cold Detroit wind cutting through my coat, sharp and clean. The water was gray and choppy under the low-hanging clouds. The city skyline loomed in the distance, half swallowed by mist. I found a quiet bench and sat down, pulling my coat tighter around me. For a while, I just sat there, breathing, feeling the cold sting my cheeks. Letting it all settle. The summit. The speech. Them. I replayed it in my head, piece by piece, my father's laugh, my mother's silence, Liam's indifference, and waited for the familiar ache to bloom. But it didn't come. Not the way it used to. There was a hollow space where the pain used to live, but instead of feeling empty, it felt clean. Like the wound had finally closed over. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, half hoping, half dreading. But it wasn't them. It was Iris. Iris, you were amazing today. Proud of you, AUD. I stared at the screen, a lump rising in my throat. Simple words. But real. Not transactional. Not grudging. Not forced. Real pride. Real care. From someone who didn't owe me anything. I typed back a quick thank you, shoved the phone away, and let my head fall back against the bench. Above me, the sky stretched out in endless muted gray. Not bright. Not perfect. But open. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I realized I didn't need them to open doors for me. I had built my own. I had found people who clapped when I won, not because they had to, not because they were expected to, but because they wanted to. And maybe, just maybe, that was more powerful than any apology I was never going to get. I sat by the river until the sun started to set, the wind picking up, carrying the sharp scent of cold water and distant traffic. The conference center behind me was mostly dark now, only a few lights still glowing in the lobby windows. People had moved on to their dinners, their after parties, their lives. I should have gotten up. Should have called a cab, headed to the hotel, maybe ordered some cheap room service and collapsed under a pile of 2 white sheets. But I didn't. Something kept me sitting there, a kind of stubborn, quiet weight in my chest. I wasn't done yet. I pulled out my phone again, scrolling through the missed notifications. One from Iris, asking if I wanted to meet up for drinks. A couple from Javier, sending memes. Nothing from my parents. Of course. Still, some reckless part of me, the part that still held on to tiny, broken pieces of hope, wanted to try once more. I didn't owe it to them. I owed it to myself. One last conversation. One last shot to say the things I had carried inside me for far too long. If they couldn't hear it, that would be on them. But I needed to say it. I called. It rang longer than I thought it would. Finally, my dad picked up. Yeah? No hello. No how are you? Straight to the usual short, flat bark. I swallowed hard. Hey. I was wondering if we could talk. A beat of silence. Then, you said enough today, didn't you? His voice wasn't angry. It was dismissive. Like brushing lint off a jacket. I closed my eyes against the sting, and breathed out slowly. Maybe. But not everything. More silence. I pictured him standing in their dim kitchen, the yellowing wallpaper curling at the corners, the same place where he once told a 9-year-old girl she was lucky to be kept. Finally, he said, fine. Talk. The words came out steadier than I expected. I'm not mad anymore, I said. Not really. I used to be. I used to want you to say you were wrong. I used to think if I worked hard enough, got good enough, did something big enough, you'd see me differently. A car drove past in the distance, its headlights slicing briefly across the water. But I get it now, I continued. You weren't ever going to see me. No matter what I did. I let the words hang there. I didn't rush to fill the silence. Let him sit with it. When he finally spoke, his voice was gruff, defensive. We did what we could. You think you had it so hard? It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. I didn't bite. I'm not calling to argue, I said quietly. I'm calling because I need you to hear it. I'm not angry. I'm not bitter. I'm just done needing anything from you. The wind picked up, whipping my hair across my face. I'm proud of the life I built, I said. And I built it without you. I heard him breathe out sharply, whether a laugh or a scoff, I couldn't tell. I'm happy, I said. And I don't need your permission to be. Another long silence. Then, without saying goodbye, he hung up. I stared at the phone in my hand. The line is dead. The conversation is over. It didn't feel satisfying. It didn't feel triumphant. It just was. Like finally setting down a weight I didn't realize I had been carrying across every mile, every city, every late night and early morning. I tucked the phone back into my pocket, stood up from the bench, and stuffed my hands into my coat. The city around me buzzed, street lights humming to life, cars splashing through puddles, the low rumble of a train in the distance. And for the first time in a very long time I felt light. Not because anything had been fixed, but because I had finally accepted that it never would be, and that was okay. Some stories don't get clean endings. Some wounds don't get neat scars. Some families don't get second chances. And life goes on anyway. The next morning, I checked out of my hotel early. I packed slowly, folding each piece of clothing with care, as if tucking the last pieces of my old life into a box I didn't need to carry anymore. Before heading back to Chicago, I stopped by a small cafe a few blocks from the river, a cozy little place with creaky floors, lopsided tables, and the best coffee I'd had in months. Iris and Javier were already there, waving from a corner booth. As soon as I slid into the seat, Iris shoved a giant cinnamon roll toward me. No speeches today, she grinned. Only carbs. I laughed, the sound bubbling out of me so easily it almost startled me. For the next hour, we talked about nothing important. Dogs. Bad dates. Crap TV shows. A new potential client Javier was chasing. Plans for the business. Nobody asked about my family. Nobody needed to. They knew. And somehow, that quiet understanding, that unconditional space, felt better than any apology ever could have. On the drive back to Chicago, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email. Subject line, Panel Opportunity, International Tech Conference in Berlin. I almost laughed out loud. 6 years ago, I was patching ripped jeans with dental floss, wondering if I'd ever matter. Now, people halfway across the world wanted me to come tell my story. I didn't answer right away. I let the email sit there, glowing softly on my passenger seat. A reminder. Proof. I didn't have to chase approval anymore. I was living proof that you could survive without it, and thrive because of it. About 2 weeks later, something strange happened. I got a letter. Not an email. Not a text. A real, physical letter. From my parents' address. At first, I considered tossing it unopened into the trash. But curiosity, that old, stubborn thread, won out. I sat at my kitchen table, slit the envelope carefully, and unfolded the paper. The handwriting was my mother's. Neat, tense. It was short. Barely a paragraph. She wrote that they were proud of what I had accomplished. That maybe they hadn't shown it well, that things were hard back then, and we didn't always know how to do better. No real apology. No deep reflection. Just a thin, brittle acknowledgement. I read it twice. And then I folded it neatly and put it back into the envelope. I didn't call. I didn't write back. Not because I was angry. Because I didn't need anything from them anymore. Their recognition, after everything, was like being offered an umbrella after you've already crossed the desert and found a house with a solid roof. Too late. And no longer necessary. 2 months later, our company got acquired by a major firm. Not a hostile takeover, a respectful partnership, one where we retained creative control but gained resources beyond anything we could have built alone. We moved into a shiny new office with floor-to-ceiling windows and a stocked fridge and conference rooms named after sci-fi characters. We hired staff. We grew. At the launch party, standing near the buffet table holding a champagne flute, I caught my reflection in the window. Older, sharper, stronger. I barely recognized the girl from Flint. And I loved her for it. 6 months after that, I heard through an old neighbor that my parents' house had gone into foreclosure. That Liam had moved back in after a failed attempt to make it big in LA, and that things had gotten messy. They asked around for help, apparently. Even mentioned me once or twice, how well I was doing, how proud they were, how close we were as a family. Neighbors said they acted like we talked all the time. I didn't reach out. I didn't send money. I didn't rescue them. Not because I hated them, but because I had already rescued the only person I was responsible for saving. Me. That was my revenge. Not cruelty. Not spite. Freedom. Peace. A life so full that their absence barely registered anymore. Last month, I stood on another stage, this time in Berlin, 1,000 faces looking up at me. When I finished speaking, I walked off stage to a line of people waiting to shake my hand, to tell me what my story meant to them. And for a moment, standing there in that bright, humming room, I closed my eyes and thought about that little girl in the torn jeans. She didn't just survive. She won. Not by beating anyone else. Not by proving anything to the people who didn't believe in her. But by building something they could never touch.